Hi, everyone. How are you? It's so good to be with you today to talk about one of the things I love to talk about the most, which is race. Second to wanting to talk about sex, two things that people are uncomfortable about talking about, but they should talk about more to make the world better. So, thank you for having me today. And I wanted to just get started by sharing why I think the conversations today were so important and poignant. Gloria Steinem, who has been a mentor and friend of mine since I began on my hashtag professional feminist journey, had shared with me that in order to ignite change and to address injustice, you really have to name it to change it. You can't address a problem without naming it and talking about it. And so as I reflect on our discussions from this morning and the critical conversations that we're having together and that the people at home are hopefully having as they watch the live stream right now in their communities, I'm feeling more hopeful about our future. And I'm also thinking a lot about my need to reach out to people who might think differently than myself a little bit more because of some of the things I heard today. But because we devoted today to naming what needs to change in order to achieve racial justice, I wanted to share why I think that books are important to building bridges and not walls, and to moving past borders and to creating opportunities to achieve racial justice. So as a writer and a publisher, the discussions that we had today about equality, about ending voter suppression, about free expression, about the perils of hate speech, which, in my opinion, blocks free expression for all people, and especially as a writer, I think that online harassment and abuse is an impingement on my speech, are paramount to ensuring that we engender a cultural landscape that inspires transformation during turbulent times. But first, as I talk about this, I'm a storyteller, so I have to kind of tell you a little bit about myself. I believe that when you come into a room and you show up, you got to tell people who you are to get them to be able to share who they are. So I was born in Columbia, South Carolina in 1980. So I'm a part of that weird generation of people who are not Generation X and not millennials, depending on who you ask. And I grew up as an expat in Saudi Arabia, which is a whole other talk for another day. But I come from a long line of activists who, as my mother would often say, made a way out of no way. And growing up, my family taught me to prioritize four things: our faith, our family, education, and our activist values. And so this family history of daring to speak up and asserting one's humanity at all costs has propelled me to do everything that I've done in my life. And those core values, specifically around education, was one thing that they drove home to me that could never be taken away from me, could never be distracted. That because my ancestors and the people who'd been born 200 years before me were not allowed to read, that learning to read was really important. Because if it hadn't been, it wouldn't have been emboldened into law. It wouldn't have been something that they worked so hard to make sure that Black people couldn't have access to. And so that has ignited a fire in me throughout my life to read voraciously, to write like my life depends on it, and most of all, to help midwife the stories of people who would otherwise be left out or marginalized or excluded from public discourse, and specifically books in my case. Growing up, my grandmother would tell me stories about how my strong Black feminist dad marched in the 1970s to protest the incarceration of his cousin. Her name was Joanne Little, and she came close to being executed by the state of North Carolina because she dared to defend herself against sexual violence in a local jail after being charged with something as simple as breaking and entering. As a child, I was also fascinated by my mother's stories about her involvement with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and the teach-ins that she participated in while growing up in the segregated state of South Carolina that I was born in. Riveted by her stories of surviving the Orangeburg Massacre in 1968, I was also shaken by witnessing her reoccurring nightmares from this formidable woman who couldn't shake the trauma of what she experienced just to be free, to speak her mind, to sit at a lunch counter. And so from her, I learned that she got that courage from learning from her father, who was what they then called a race man, an NAACP member who traveled the South with his family, organizing meetings and marches to end segregation and to advocate for voter rights, and that the entire family worked diligently to fight racism in the way that they could, not only to impact their present, but to pave the way for the next generation, and for me, and for us, to be closer to freedom. Through their stories, I learned about the devastating depths of human cruelty, as well as the enduring transcendence and integrity of people who heeded Ida B. Wells' call to action, that the way to right wrongs is to shine the light of truth on them. I learned from them that the struggle is not new, and that shared values can build momentum, they can shift cultural narratives, and they can even influence policy. So that's why I'm a culture jammer, because through their example and encouragement to speak truth to power, they taught me to use my strengths, my voice, and my vision to play the long game, trust that the world can and must be better, even if we encounter resistance from folks who don't get it yet. Their legacy is in large part why I'm passionate about continuing the involvement of our family line. And I'm encouraged by Coretta Scott King's wisdom and truth that the struggle is a never-ending process. Freedom is never won. You earn it and you win it in every generation. And that's why I'm doing my part in the ways that I can. That's why I'm continuing the family tradition by using my skills as a writer, an editor, and being the ultimate Black girl nerd to write more and diverse and inclusive books, and to write into the world that I needed to have be a reality when I was younger, but unfortunately wasn't there. And that's why I'm talking to you today about why I'm dedicated to transforming the stories that we tell our children. Because the stories that my family told me were stories that inspired me to action, but there's a lot of other more toxic stories that we're telling our children that are impacting our world in perilous ways. And those are specifically the stories about race that we talk today. And that's why I wrote Young, Gifted, and Black. It's a love letter to our ancestors and the next generation of catalysts. And in the spirit of Young, Gifted, and Black, beautiful, iconic tune that was dedicated by one of my favorite musicians, Nina Simone, if people didn't know, there she is right there, to her friend Lorraine Hansberry in her memory. And Lorraine Hansberry, for people who might not know her, was the first Black woman to write a Broadway play. She wrote this song as a tribute to Lorraine's 1964 "The Nation Needs Your Gifts." And this speech was to young Black creative writing contest winners. So when I first started writing and was unsure about sharing my stories publicly, my grandfather, who was born in 1911 and who grew up in a segregated community, came to me in a dream. People who know me in the room, I'm a very spiritual person, so I pay attention to these dreams. And he said, write the books you needed when you were younger. Go to New York. Go to NYU, where he had been one of the first Blacks to be in their industrial design master's program. His belief in me and my purpose and what he sacrificed so that I could be free feels like my own version of Lorraine and Nina's message. He saw what I could be before I could understand the depths of my own potential. And that is why I wrote this book for the children, because I want them to see what I see for them and for us as a result of their greatness. For my illustrator and book partner, Andrea, the experience of working on this book while expecting a baby boy solidified the importance of books that show people who look like him, especially in this political climate. And she is an African-American Brazilian woman. She is dedicating this book to him because we wish that every child who encounters Gifted and Black will know that the world needs their gifts, the gifts that only they can provide, that they are more than enough, and that we see their greatness today, tomorrow, and beyond. We know that the kids are all right, and we surely need to learn from them because we are not getting it right. We both believe in the power of creating what we need to see, and the books that we read and the media we consume deeply influence our understanding of who we are and what we can be. They also impact how we understand and know each other. And although much has changed since Lorraine's speech and Nina's songs were written, the stories that are focused on in movies and school and TV often present a very limited view of the achievements and the stories of people of color. All children deserve to see themselves represented positively in stories. It's really sad to me that I would fight with my mom about wanting a rainbow bright birthday cake and she would make it chocolate because there weren't enough role models for me, but she wanted me to appreciate who I was. That's why we're highlighting the talent and the contributions of change makers around the world, because we want children around the world to know and learn our collective history. And also because Nina, who was not able to grant us permission to use her song to inspire us, did call on us to say that there's an excuse for the next generation not to know who the heroes and the heroines are. As much as I wrote this book for children, I also wrote it for myself, and I had to admit that. I wrote it as a way to promote counter-speech and to diversify representation in children's literature, which annoyingly and reprehensibly is 80% white at all levels of the publishing industry. Representation matters, and it matters that Andrea and I worked on this book together. It is annoying to me, again, that Andrea and I are unicorns in our industry to be a woman of color publishing team on this book. And we want to change. We want the children who read this book to understand that they too can be culture creators, and that you don't have to be white or male to be able to be a decision maker in the publishing industry. And I also learned that representation matters because I learned early on that a lack of inclusion and the alienation that comes from it can be very silencing. So when I was 18 years old, not very far from here, just several miles, I was a student at American University. And I had long, kingy braids at that time, and I was majoring in broadcast journalism, which was my passion. I was voted most likely to be an MTV video disc jockey in my superlatives in school. But I had other aspirations. I could see my future self as an award-winning global correspondent, a frontline war reporter like my childhood idol, Christiane Amanpour. And I had wanted to be the ebony Christiane Amanpour. Then something happened that I never saw coming. My teacher, an older white male professor, who was tenured, so I also kind of had to be careful about this engagement that followed, looked me in the eyes and said, "I'd hate to see you waste your articulateness. You are well-spoken. You have a young, so you will enjoy a long shelf life in this field. But you have to straighten your hair in order to be taken seriously in the media. It doesn't matter how talented you are. No one's going to hire you looking like that." And essentially, I was told I would need to change my authentic self to be on camera. I had fought so hard in my life as the only Black person in schools to love and appreciate my hair that I just couldn't bring myself to change something that I hated and turned into love. So although I was told that my voice would not matter unless it was packaged in a body that fit into a narrow standard, I decided to press on and to do other things. One of the reasons I wanted to be a reporter in the first place was because I watched CNN and BBC religiously as an expat kid in Saudi Arabia. Partly because of censorship, so there were only 2 channels that I could watch that weren't black market Betamax videos. But I rarely saw myself reflected in anchors still the same. And I loved media, and I also wanted to be a role model and a mirror for girls of color like me who wanted to see themselves, not having to be the Black or the Asian Christiane Amanpour, but to just be a war reporter. And although it was initially painful, this professor is someone who I have sent a thank you letter because he drove me toward the work that I'm passionate about today as a feminist media activist and a publisher. It's been very healing for me to transform my very righteous anger into creative alchemy. And now, instead of asking myself what I need to do to be included, I wonder, what can I build, create for me and for my community to pave new ground without shrinking myself? And this is a lesson that I want to share with the next generation of creators. So as we state in the book, this book is a beginning and not an end. I've gotten a lot of very impassioned letters from people who are very upset about some of the glaring omissions of the book. And I'm sorry to Michael Jackson fans everywhere. And Jamaicans are also very upset with me about Bob Marley. But we're inviting readers on a journey through time, through space, with Mae Jemison, and across borders. That provides a small but a mighty snapshot of the infinite amount of celebrated and unsung heroes worldwide, from the US to Australia. And we look to the lessons of the past while imagining what's possible when we dare to be bold and when we inspire children from all backgrounds to follow suit. With each of our 51 visionary leaders, we see that each of us has unique strengths that we develop as children. Each of us has gone through heartbreaks, through triumphs, and we can reach those triumphs more often when we have a fearless pursuit of our dreams. And the children who have been reading this book, I hope, are learning that they're unified in their desire to transform their visions into reality, no matter what color they are. and through the letters that we're receiving from children from all races across the world, from Texas to East Dulwich in London to New Orleans to Australia, we're seeing that everyone can see elements of themselves in the stories of tremendous leaders, and that most of the kids end their letters with 2 PSs for their postscripts. One, that they want to end a book with themselves being a part of it, that they want to be featured in Young Asian and Gifted, or they want to be featured in Young Latinx and Gifted, or they want to be a better ally, or they also want to create a book like this and find out how I became a writer and how Andrea became an illustrator. And I want to make a world in a publishing industry where it's possible to bring their vision into reality. And as the first woman of color and the youngest to lead feminist press in almost 50 years of existence, I joined the team at a time when Black women are breaking new ground in our industry, including Lisa Lucas, who's the executive director of the National Book Foundation, and Vanessa Kangori, who's the publishing director of British Vogue. It's great that we're here, but we need many more of us to have more diverse books. So my hope is that books like Young, Gifted, and Black and the diverse narratives that we publish at Feminist Press, like the book Go Home, which is an exhilarating anthology of Asian diasporic writing, and How Mamas Love Their Babies, a picture book about the myriad of ways that mamas from everywhere live and care for their children, will help change hearts and minds, but also empower young people and the people who care about them to write and to share the stories that they needed growing up. Because as UK laureate Mallory Blackman, who is their beautiful children's laureate, and is also someone featured in Young, Gifted, and Black, shameless plug, has said, reading is an exercise in empathy, as it's also an exercise in walking in someone else's shoes for a while. And so that is why we created this book, because we want to create a better world for our children, and I hope that you will join me in changing the stories that we tell our children so that we can all be free. Thank you.